co-instructor for the course that has brought together these speakers is Ashley Eaton, who just turned on her camera. So we have today, the Zoom is set up as a webinar. So you've been using the chat to send your greetings to one another. There's also a question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. So if you mouse over the Zoom window where our videos are showing, and sort of towards the bottom right is the Q&A. So you are welcome to use that at any point in time to ask a question. And James, our speaker, has about 25 minutes or so of presentation. If you have something pressing that you'd like answered right away, you can put your question in the Q&A box, and Ashley and I will be monitoring that. And we also will have an opportunity for you to ask questions, and back and forth. We can turn on your microphone so that you can speak your questions after James is done presenting. So feel free to use that. And otherwise, I think we should be good to go. I'm pleased to present James Sherrard, who's the Stormwater Program Coordinator for the City of Burlington. He came to the City of Burlington last summer in July 2019 after almost 5 years as the inaugural Stormwater Coordinator with the City of Williston. And so we're really pleased to be able to have James here today to be able to share the perspective of how city, and specifically Burlington, is dealing with stormwater and how that's driven from policies from the state level, from the federal level, down to the municipal level, and what that means for the actions that Burlington is required and is opting to take to address stormwater. So I'm going to shut off my video and my mic and turn it over to James.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, my name is James Sherrard, Stormwater Program Coordinator here in Burlington. The title of this gives a rough idea of what we're going to chat about, the history of federal and state permitting and how it shapes Burlington's stormwater program today. In case you didn't know what date it was, I made it really hard to see down there in Lake Champlain. It's 10/26, and it actually also happens to be my 1-month marriage anniversary. So after this presentation, everyone can stay in line and give me all the marriage advice that I'm sure to need in the coming years. But to move forward into the rest of this presentation, we're going to rough outline. We're going to talk about big picture stormwater. We're going to talk about how that has evolved nationally, and then how it moves into affecting Vermont, and how Vermont has changed with the times to meet our stormwater needs. I'll talk a bit about Burlington's combined sewer system. If there are folks on the call that don't know what a combined sewer system is, you may inadvertently be referring to it as a CSO system. A combined sewer system is just that. It's a mixture of sanitary waste and stormwater all in the same pipe. A CSO, a combined sewer overflow, is when the rain event is big enough so that the treatment plant can't treat it all, and you have untreated or partially treated waste getting into a water body. So when you hear me say CSS, it talks about the system as a whole. If we talk about CSO, that's talking about a particular event, a combined sewer overflow. We're then going to jump into some talk about resident participation, what programs Burlington has to deal with them, and how we try to offer those services and increase resident participation. Stormwater implementation process, that's going to be more about, we want to build something here in the city, stormwater related. What goes into that? What are the steps that affects a municipal employee like me trying to get those things built? And then near the end of the presentation, we'll just click through some examples, some visual examples of green and gray stormwater, and also a subsurface system. I picked those three because those are the three stormwater management best practices we use here the most in Burlington. You can follow along on the bottom of your screen where we're at. Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of fun with this slide. I wish I could hear you all because I'm sure you'll be laughing, but I really wanted to take a minute and put the national permitting history for stormwater in terms of, well, our national social structure and things that have happened in our history, to put them in context. So you go all the way back to 1963 and you have the implementation of the Clean Air Act. This is the real big umbrella legislation that eventually led to the Clean Water Act in in 1972. But starting back in 1963, the federal government said, we got to start cleaning up our air. If you were eating what you would consider buffalo wings at that time, you would not have called them buffalo wings. That name wasn't even invented yet. I think that's really important to know that, you know, our nation at least started dealing with clean air before we named the buffalo wing. Also, that's before the 8-track. If you don't know what that is, that's okay, not surprised. It's something you listened to music with back in the day. And if you were on one of Vermont's slopes back in 1963, you weren't snowboarding because snowboarding hadn't even come out yet. So moving forward to 1972, the Clean Water Act. They took the Clean Air Act, used that big umbrella to create the Clean Water Act. This originally focused mostly on point source pollution. Point source is, let's say you have some sort of business or industrial activity that is generating waste, and all that waste will come literally out of a pipe, a point source, and then end up in a water body. So that's what the Clean Water Act was originally designed to tackle. So they went ahead and put that in place before jet skis were an option. I hope you were really chewing your food because Heimlich maneuver was not yet out when the Clean Water Act was passed. There was no Sony Walkman. If you don't know what that is, that's also okay. It was the next iteration of 8-track, and also mobile phones weren't around yet. So a lot different. 1987, getting a little closer to current day, the NIPDES program expanded National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. A program expanded to include non-point source runoff, or pollution rather, which includes runoff and stormwater. So branching out from just a point source, we're talking about big picture runoff from impervious surfaces, agricultural land, etc. That's where we start to grab that sort of management. That's really important for stormwater, obviously, because we are non-point source runoff. And in the next bullet, we'll see what NIPDES created as a method of managing that non-point source runoff in urban areas. That all happened before tilt and roll luggage. So if you're going to an airport, you had to just carry your baggage. Really not great. If you're trying to quit smoking, no nicotine patch. Any electronic devices you had, no electronic firewalls, just Wild West. And the self-ringing mop was not yet invented. I find that very, very important, having used a regular mop before, and it is very labor intensive. So thank you, self-ringing mops. 1990, phase 1 of the municipally separate storm sewers come into effect. That phase 1 grabs municipalities of a population of 100,000 or over. Now, how you're designated an MS4 is a combination of the US Census getting density information, creating maps of urbanized area, and then if your municipality is urban enough to trigger that designation, you need to become an MS4. Now that's pretty straightforward with the phase 1 that had municipalities over 100,000. But as you get down to phase 2, smaller municipalities, that becomes a little bit more important in the designation, those urbanized areas. But sticking to the phase 1, if you're using a computer back then in 1990, your mouse didn't have a scroll wheel. That just sounds really frustrating. A couple programs that seem to have been around forever, Adobe Flash and JavaScript, weren't in existence yet. Also, I don't know how anyone got anywhere because Segway wasn't yet around, and the first MP3 players were invented in 1990. So going to phase 2, that starts to regulate MS4s that are less than 100,000 population. To put that in perspective for Chittenden County, right now, Burlington, South Burlington, Colchester, Shelburne, Williston, they are all MS4 communities. If you start going out to Richmond and Jericho and look at the urbanized maps, which you can find online, there are sections of Jericho and Richmond that are dense enough to be a urbanized area, but it's such a small percentage of the entire municipality, they don't need to have their own MS4 permit. So that's just sort of painting a picture and a perspective of what phase 2 captures. There's obviously way more municipalities than phase 1. And in 1999, that's before the iPod, and also before 2020 college seniors were invented. So we're really getting pretty recent here, with municipalities like Burlington being regulated. Stepping away from national and getting into the more local regulation in 2016, the final Lake Champlain TMDL. It's kind of the second iteration after the first go around in 2016 came out. That TMDL is driving a lot of what the state's doing right now. It's to stay true to the title here. One of the reasons why I have a job, and that was before the iPhone X, Nintendo Switch, fidget spinners came out in 2016, also very important, and that was the last full year of Barack Obama's presidency. So now you have a very good picture of what the nation was like when certain aspects of those national and state regulations came out. Okay, narrowing down into Vermont. A stormwater utility, just real briefly, big picture sort of definition of what a stormwater utility is. A utility collects fees from parcels based on their land use and impervious cover. We then take that information, we actually pull it in, analyze it, digest it, and then use that information to assign a fee to each parcel based on that impervious cover and that land use. What's important about most utilities, and that's certainly true for Williston and Burlington, is that money then becomes dedicated in an enterprise fund to stormwater. What does that mean? It means that any money we spend from those fees has to have a direct nexus to managing stormwater water quality here in Burlington. Stormwater utilities in Vermont. The first one was South Burlington. They were they sort of broke ground and were the visionaries for getting utilities in Vermont. Burlington came in after, then Williston back in 2015, pretty quickly after that, Colchester and St. Albans City. This is pretty common with stormwater utilities, pretty fascinating. I've heard them referred to as geographic hotspots. So what will happen is a municipality will, for one reason or another, say we need a stormwater utility. And that first one is actually pretty expensive. They often need to prove they have the legal right to create a utility. They'll do that either in partnership with or versus the state. Quite often local business people may fight that, adding costs of litigation or just staff time to figure out what they want to do to make sure they can move forward into the realm of utility. And then also, if there's no structure, you need to hire consultants to create the structure of the utility. Maybe there are no local consultants that are experienced in that. So the whole thing just costs a lot more. But because we're municipalities and everything is public, you can sort of copy paste each time. And I can say for a fact that Williston really drew on what South Burlington and Burlington did in the creation of theirs. And back when I was still working for Williston, we got a lot of questions from Colchester, saying, hey, how did you do this? Can you send along stuff? And we do. So that's a geographical hotspot. And you tend to see a lot in a real close proximity pop up in a short amount of time. Oh, I'm gonna pop back there. Vermont Clean Water Act came out in 2016, same year as the Lake Champlain TMDL. I'm not gonna read this paragraph here, but essentially what the act did was, it was a statement from the state saying, here, this is a real important environmental legislation we wanna tackle. We're going to pass this and it's going to help us find funds and really get those funds dedicated towards these important cleanup efforts. Not just Lake Champlain, the Clean Water Act will help with all impaired waters. And throughout the state of Vermont, there's a bunch that need help. So that's boiling it down local. Let's jump into even more local than Vermont, Burlington. So we talked about Burlington's combined sewer system in the very first slide, the overview. I'm going to talk about this image you see here on the left in brief to sort of describe the extent of the combined sewer here in Burlington. One note with combined sewer systems, new cities do not get built or designed with combined sewers. There are good reasons for them. They actually do help treat stormwater throughout the year, but they're not ideal. The best case scenario is that these things are actually separate. It's something we inherited from previous generations, seemed like a good idea at the time, now we have it, and we're gonna do the best that we can with it. And to show you the extent of the combined sewer here in Burlington, if you look at the purple areas, that center purple area where the word Burlington is actually located, everything that's purple there drains to our main plant, and it's combined stormwater and sanitary water. You'll see if you can look down just below the main blob, there's a couple smaller purple blobs, including one triangular one. Remember that triangular one? What that means is those are sort of inholdings from a larger combined sewer system. The areas around them were either removed from a combined sewer in years past, or when they were developed, they were never combined sewer to begin with. So we do have these weird little pockets, including the pink ones in the new north end. Those are pockets of combined sewer that go to the north plant. Also, just we're looking at this map, the yellow areas, stormwater drains directly to Centennial Brook. The green areas, stormwater drains directly to Englesby Brook. Any of the dark blue areas, that's going either directly to Winooski or Lake Champlain. So there's your sort of big picture overview, giving you some sense of scale with regards to combined sewer here in Burlington. Just some of the bullets under Burlington attributes. You already know where we drain. Roughly 40,000 folks here in Burlington. This 36 inches of rain on average per year is important. I do believe we're staying somewhere near there, might be trending up slightly. The more important thing to note is that due to climate change, one of the ways Burlington and Vermont and large is getting affected the most is we are getting less frequent, more intense rain events, which is not great. More events that are much smaller are better for growing crops. They allow for infiltration of rainwater into our natural surfaces much better, therefore recharging our groundwater and having less surface runoff. When you have really large events like the Halloween storm last year, or some of the ones early this spring here in Vermont and Burlington, they come in so fast, so intense, and drop so much rain in a short period of time that A, our systems can't always handle it, so you get some localized flooding. B, you're more likely to have combined sewer overflows, what we want to avoid. And C, you don't get any of that groundwater recharge, which is really unfortunate because that's super important for all of our water bodies, and it just results in more runoff, causing erosion, getting straight into our surface water bodies, and it's not great. So while Vermont is a great place to be when it comes to climate change in general, this is one of the areas that we're going to have to struggle with in years to come. Moving on to that fourth bullet, Burlington has just a wild array of soils and subsurface conditions. We have soils in the Old North End that can drain at 100 inches per hour, which is a beach sand. Down in the South End, you may have the exact opposite with a super high groundwater level, tight clays, and maybe even ledge that comes up to within inches, or exposed ledge here in the city. So one size does not fit all in Burlington. We really need to be able to attack stormwater problems with a whole array of tools. I'm not even going to read the first bullet in sewer system. It's very confusing. It's technically accurate. It'd take me a couple minutes to run through it. What I want to say with that bullet is a lot of our city is sewered. A lot of our impervious area is sewered. So that big purple blob, that's a ton of impervious. Per acre, there's a lot more impervious in that purple blob than if you go north to that dark blue and the pink splotches. That's the New North End, more suburban, much more pervious area, much more green space. So where there is combined sewer, there is a lot of impervious area. That's what I want to say with that bullet. We have 3 separate wastewater plants. Within our combined sewer system, we have 5 CSOs. Only 2 of them are still pretty active. The other 3, it takes a large event to trigger those. So years past, I don't know, maybe just a decade or so ago, we had about 12 CSOs. And now we're down to 5 with only 2 being really active. So we are getting better. In a perfect world, we'd never have an overflow, but we're making strides. I mentioned this earlier. We inherited this combined sewer system from previous generations of Burlingtonians, but it's over 100 years old in certain spots. We have over 3,000 catch basins, 53 miles of separate storm pipe, and 46 miles of combined sewer pipe. So that's just a lot of, that's a couple ultra marathons there each. And then we have well over 100 stormwater outfalls here in the city that we need to maintain as well and drain all that stormwater. Okay. We're going to jump into resident participation. The city of Burlington wants to encourage residents to manage stormwater as best they can. We have systems in place to hold larger developments accountable to certain levels of stormwater management, but we don't necessarily have those same systems in place to regulate residential parcels. So in many cases, we're asking for volunteerism. One of those is in Adopt a Drain. Adopt a Drain is currently undergoing web map updates. If anyone here has worked with Esri and GIS, every once in a while they'll do an update and then all of a sudden things go haywire. We're in the process of updating it. So if you go to our website now, you won't be able to see all the drains that have been adopted. But when this is back up and running, you'll see that you can locate all the basins that are already adopted. You can see the ones that are not. You can adopt one. Once you adopt one, that'll put you in a program to get a training from someone like me here in the city, where we'll say how to do this safely, what to watch out for, where to best. And really what that boils down to is in larger storms, especially in the fall where there's a lot of leaf litter, you're going to be going out there and raking a catch basin. This is immensely important. A lot of our localized flooding events can point to late fall, big storm events, and all those down leaves. Even if they weren't down the morning of, if they were cleaned up the morning of, the trees just happen to drop the rest of their leaves that afternoon in a big storm, and you'll just get these catch basins clogged. So with 3,000 of them, the city itself can't keep all this clean, so the residents can do a big part in managing that stormwater. Also, you get to name them, which is super cool. Looking through the database, I'm a stormwater fan. I'm a Star Wars fan and a stormwater fan. R2 Drain 2, Landu Culvertman, and Obi Drain Kenobi, just really, really great names for your adopted drain. Stormwater friendly driveways. If you look in the lower left, you'll see a ribbon driveway. We're always looking for local residents that are interested in converting to less impervious on their driveways. That second bullet talks about how incentives were in place for people putting in ribbon driveways in the past. And that brings us to a residential incentive program. We did a really successful pilot with Blue BTV back in 2018, where a number, I want to say close to 50 folks had their parcels reviewed for potential residential stormwater upgrades and best management practices they could implement. And multiple dozens of them actually implemented a best management practice, and we had rebates in place depending on what you did and how much it costs, et cetera. That program has since ceased in its full functionality, but we're in the process right now of pulling together, we've pulled together requests for proposals. We're looking at various organizations that have submitted proposals to be that next step, a more permanent, a more robust step in us having a tool here where a parcel owner can reach out and say, hey, what can I do? We can send someone there, have a design pulled together, and then have them implement that design and get a rebate. Now that rebate wouldn't be for everything, but hopefully it could help a lot of folks make that next step and say, yeah, I'm gonna do this just out of a volunteer environmental benefit view for the city. Okay, Burlington's stormwater implementation process. 2 slides here. This gets to, we want to build something. Where do we do it? How do we do it? What do we consider? This is a lot of my job. You start with design considerations. What sewer sheds do we want to locate these systems in? The image here, I'm going to jump back a couple slides. If you look at that purple triangle in the bottom of the screen that's surrounded by the light green, jumping forward, that's what we're looking at. Now, what sewer shed do we want to look at these systems in? This is a combined sewer system, so one of those in-holdings surrounded by disconnected areas. This contributes to one of our active CSOs. And pretty much this screenshot I have here, it's just that area. You go a little south, little east, little north, and obviously, well, east is the Burlington Country Club, so not east, but you just go anywhere outside of this screenshot of the area, and it's no longer contributing to the Pine Barge Canal CS overflow. So siting is absolutely essential when we're picking a location. So now we've picked a location, be it a combined sewer area contributing to an active CSO, or maybe in an impaired stormwater watershed such as Inglesby Brook. We cited it because we want to do something there. What do we think about? Well, further location, is it in the greenbelt? Pretty limited space in a lot of greenbelts. Traffic calming bump out. Bump outs are great. You reclaim impervious roadway. But then you have traffic implications, parking implications. Public parcels, sure, we own it, but we don't have a lot of public parcels. They're very limited. So we don't necessarily want to cite stormwater in a public parcel. Private parcels, okay, a lot of private parcels. They are undoubtedly located where we want to put stormwater systems, but then you have a real sticky situation with long-term maintenance and upkeep and ownership of that stormwater system, and what happens if the owner changes hands and isn't as amenable. So that's got a lot of complications. Other towns, this is a fun one. You may not have seen me going here. Burlington managing stormwater in other towns. Well, we're in early discussions with DEC about the potential to contribute funds generated in Burlington to manage riparian areas, up gradient, up the Newski River corridor. And by reestablishing those riparian areas in more rural spots of Vermont, it's all connected to Lake Champlain. If they're contributing to the Winooski, they're contributing to something that Burlington also contributes to. But reestablishing our riparian areas is likely the cheapest way to manage phosphorus, reduce phosphorus, remove it from the system. And with limited funds statewide, also Burlington has limited funds. If we can find ways to help out more rural areas to establish those riparian areas, get phosphorus credits in Burlington, it does seem like a win-win. With all that said, it may not happen. There are a lot of moving parts. We're certainly excited to be talking with DEC about the potential. And then subsurface utilities. This image here, this is just a snapshot of utilities. It's a lot of them. It's not all of them. We still have communication utilities we don't know about. So when you're siting a stormwater system, you are undoubtedly going to have to do a lot of work figuring out what's below where you're going to be putting that water. Continuing on in a less technical, but really, really important aspect of siting a stormwater system is public outreach. So the image in the upper left, that's a screenshot from one of our websites. We have a dedicated website for this one particular project we're doing, so residents can go there and see the progress. The lower left shows parking impacts. The blue are the systems that are proposed. The red is lost parking. The yellow is maybe lost parking, depending on Burlington Fire Department long-term monitoring. And then the green is parking is going to remain. So when you're developing public outreach, it varies by location. Just like the soil types vary throughout the city, the type of residents vary throughout the city. You may have lower income or higher income neighborhoods, and they actually require a different level of public outreach. There may be language barriers in certain areas of the city in which you need to be very mindful about how you're pulling together your material. Do you have multiple languages on physical handouts? Do you send them to websites to get that? Do you just have notes saying, if you need translation services, contact us here? So that's a big part of our outreach for stormwater. This is an interesting one. How often does the city touch an area, in air quotes? If residents don't really see many public works staffers, if for some reason they live in a neighborhood that doesn't need a lot of work, if you want to do work there, all of a sudden they're hypersensitive to it. If you lived in the Old North End like I did, we're pretty much used to it. If there's an excavator outside digging up a road, we might not even ask because sure, they're probably supposed to be there. But these are all things to take into consideration for how we're going to structure our public outreach to the community. And then of course the pandemic. I'm not telling anyone here something they don't already know. We've transitioned to remote webinars as opposed to in-person neighborhood meetings. And the interesting one is, when we're out in these spots, marking out locations, chances are these folks are not working from home. And they might, for better or worse, see you outside in a yellow vest and come and talk to you. I touched upon emergency services, but every time we want to site a stormwater system in a roadway, we need to clear that with the Burlington Fire Department, and for good reason. We don't want to create a traffic calming bump out that has a stormwater component to it that all of a sudden makes it impossible for a fire truck to make a turn. So we get designs, we go to emergency services, we have turning radii that makes sense. We then, for parking removal, all parking removal needs to go to Public Works Commission for final approval. In every one of those steps, there's input, whether it be from emergency services or the public. We may need to circle right back around to the design, change the design, go through outreach again. And so it's an iterative process, but a really important one. Okay, we're near the end of the presentation. I'm going to speed through a few of these systems. Yeah, you can see what the city of Burlington tries to implement to manage our stormwater. This Hyde Street bioretention system is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, bioretentions we have in the city. Mansfield Ave. This is one of the only ones that's located entirely within a green belt, which is pretty cool. A lot of others have some sort of bump out component to them. Grant and Winooski, if you live in Burlington, this is pretty heavy foot traffic area, all things considered. You can see some sunflowers back there. We're very lucky. Many of our stormwater systems have had a lot of volunteer labor. And if you walk by this one, they'll have some beautiful perennials. And it's pretty great to see the local community taking ownership of how these things look and function. Russell North Street, this is brand new as of last year. This is actually grabbing a lot of runoff. It's a great little system. St. Paul and King Street. So on the left, last winter. On the right, this summer. If there's anything I can have you take away with regards to green infrastructure, and I'm not a huge fan of term green for reasons you can see on the screen, but I think the nomenclature has won out in the stormwater field. So with green stormwater infrastructure, it's not always green. It's not always going to look beautiful. It doesn't mean it's not functioning. You have dormant plants on the left. You have vibrant plants on the right. It's just the, seasonality. Take away seasonality. Please don't yell at us. Okay, moving on to gray infrastructure. These gray pavers are actually pervious. The lighter gray, almost white sidewalk is not pervious. So you have my dog Reverend really curious and kind of disappointed in me for allowing salt buildup here on these pavers. And that salt buildup is actually even pushing down gradient onto that tree grate. Even if you communicate maintenance needs to your maintenance professionals in a city, it's hard to get them to change practices. But also local businesses will do their own salting, sanding, whatnot to encourage folks coming to their place of business. So there is an educational lift that we can always get better at, but we do try to pass along. Okay, picture on the left. What a beautiful parking lot, right? You cannot even tell it's pervious, but it is. It's down by the new marina. And on the right, you have a picture of us testing out some pervious cleaning equipment that we're actually in the process of procuring. So we can maintain these things to function as designed. Pretty excited about that. But these are just a couple pictures. Gray infrastructure, gray stormwater infrastructure may not look like much, and that's okay. Lastly, we have subsurface storage systems. These are actually really, really cool. There's a bunch of them in the Old North End because we have that great sand. It's a pretty simple concept. You dig up the road. Hopefully you don't have too many subsurface utility conflicts. You put in these yellow chambers, kind of half circle chambers, and pack them with stone. You make sure the runoff gets in there. They take so much runoff out of a drainage area, and then that turns into infiltration, so it doesn't enter our combined sewer system, or it delays it, greatly delays the runoff before it gets to the combined sewer system, and sometimes that's all you need. There's peaks in a storm, kind of that hydrograph look. And if you can lower that peak or delay the peak, then the wastewater treatment plant may be able to handle the storm no problem. So these are awesome. We love to put these in. They're a really great best management tool if you have the right soils. Thank you. We're on to questions. Appreciate you listening to me. And if I can answer any of the questions that came up, let me know. And I'm happy to also go back to a different slide for reference if needed. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, James, very much. So we want to open the floor to everybody who's here with us for questions and answers. You can put them again in the Q&A directly at the bottom, or you can I keep forgetting platforms. There's no hand raising, but you can drop something in the chat and say you would like to speak, or do that in the question and answer. All is fair game. I see a question here in the chat from William Parkhill. It says, Burlington's citizens have bonded millions of dollars over the past years to separate sewer from stormwater. Can you talk about what the money spent to date accomplished, and where is the focus for future spending?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm not going to be able to talk in real specifics about where we have separated sewer recently. We haven't separated a lot of sewer in the last few years, that's for sure. I know I mentioned earlier that in the last decade or so, we've gone from 12 combined sewer overflows down to 5. That's a combination of stormwater management and sewer separation. The money that we're getting now may be assigned to separation in certain parts, especially if it makes sense, and especially if we're digging up a road. The city is in the process of something called integrated planning, of which my coworkers can talk in a lot more detail, and we have some really great resources on our integrated planning page here on our city website. The reason I'm bringing that up is that integrated planning process is specifically designed to both model and figure out where we can best spend our limited dollars to make sure combined sewers don't overflow as much. And with that being the ultimate goal, in certain places, separation may not actually be the best thing to do in that spot. Separation is immensely costly. As the last estimate I heard a few years ago was it would cost over $100 million to separate all the sewer. And then you would still need multi-millions above that, maybe, dozens of millions. That's a weird way to phrase it, tens of millions, to manage the stormwater that's no longer going to the wastewater treatment plant. So not trying to dodge the question at all. Sewer separation will certainly be on the table, but the integrated planning effort is absolutely going to gear our spending and prioritize our spending in the years to come, whether it be really significant subsurface storage, lots of decentralized traffic calming bump outs, or separation.
Thanks, James. So the next question I see is from Kristen Ross. Are the yellow tubes you just showed made of plastic?
Yes, they are. I know some of these are made out of recycled plastic, not all. I can't guarantee if these are or not, if that's where you're getting at, but they are made out of plastic.
Thanks. Athena Lee Bradley asks, what do you see the role of compost is for stormwater management?
Wow, what a great question. And I know Chris could jump in here as well. Compost is a double-edged sword. One of the reasons that we have so much phosphorus leaving from ag land is because of cow manure, inorganic compost. Inorganic compost, cow manure is often a component. This is a long roundabout way of getting to what I want to say, which is that organic compost often has really high phosphorus, like really high phosphorus. So if you're building a stormwater system that has a green component that requires compost, you need to be really mindful of what sort of compost you're using, or you might be actually a net exporter of phosphorus into the system for a long time, which is opposite of what you want. In the City Hall Park, in the St. Paul Great Streets stormwater efforts, which are, if you live here in Burlington, you know all about them, but if you don't, basically they just got finished this year and the previous year. All of those bioretention systems had very thoughtfully sourced and tested compost that had low P. That is often leaf litter based. So when you ask how is compost going to play a part in stormwater management or water quality control, my answer to you is we need to be careful utilizing it, just because of the fact that it could inadvertently be a net exporter of phosphorus.
Thanks, James.
And if that didn't get to your question, please reiterate or point me in the right direction.
Yeah, we can turn turn your mics on to have you ask too if you want to follow up. So there's another question here from Ann Millers. She says, I live in a rural development with a stormwater permit. Where can I find information related to stormwater in rural areas that help understand what friendly driveways and pervious parking areas are?
Okay, so you live in a rural area and your development has a stormwater permit and you want to know how you could perhaps help with that permit? I hope I'm getting that.
I think that's how I'm interpreting. And Anne, if you want, we can turn your mic on if you want to clarify if we're not all correct.
So stormwater permits, just speaking broadly, unless you want to jump in, Anne, they allow a certain amount of impervious in a particular area. So let's, for the sake of discussion, say you live in a development in a more rural area and the developer came in and built the road and built the houses and built the driveways. The stormwater permit that allowed that development is going to say, okay, that's 3.4 acres. That's what you're allowed to do. In order to do it, you need to build this pond or this gravel wetland, and you're good. If you live in that development and you want to remove impervious, that's going to be completely okay. Unless you're in an area that has contaminated soils for some reason and you're greatly worried about a groundwater plume getting additional runoff on it, which is almost never the case in a rural area. If you wanted to turn your driveway into a ribbon driveway, I would certainly let the state know. If you have an engineer hired for your annual inspections, let them know. But when you go backwards, when you go removing impervious, that's almost always allowed within a state stormwater permit.
Nice. Cool.
Speaking as a city employee and not a state employee, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your respective state DEC rep for stormwater.
Okay. And Anne said, yeah, she would like the gravel driveway to go to pervious. Moving over back to the chat for a second, Lynette has said, please talk about the grant-related green stormwater infrastructure investments that the city has been making.
Thank you, Lynette. The city is always trying to find pots of money from either the state or the federal government. Actually, many of the areas that I showed you, flipping the area that I showed you in this presentation, this area here, that is grant funded from the state. It's actually 100% grant funded, which means the city of Burlington doesn't need to match anything. That's pretty rare. Often you need at least a 50% match or an 80% match or something like that. So the city is always looking for these really excellent opportunities where we say, hey, we're gonna remove stormwater or treat water quality. And there are options out there that the state has for municipalities like Burlington to get significant financial help for these projects. So kind of teasing out your question, Lynette, when you talk about a grant investment, grant-related green stormwater infrastructure investments, even if the city needs to chip in a little bit of money for a grant match, it pays back real quickly with the water quality benefits we get. Now, Lynette, I know that was a leading question. It was intended to be softball. If I didn't quite knock it out of the park as well as you'd hoped, please help me along.
All right, we'll watch if she comes in. So I'm going to ask, she says all good. So thanks, Lynette. So Rachel was next, and then we've got William on deck here. So Rachel Wood's question is, does the city have a plan for operation and maintenance of all these already implemented GSI and future GSI?
Yeah, really great question and super important. Often our residents can be critical about our stormwater infrastructure, and in the past that criticism was warranted. I can tell you that as of this past year, we've partnered with a private contractor that's responsible for all of the stormwater systems, surface stormwater system maintenance, which is really important. And I think they've provided a really high-end product this year. They will also be contracted next year. There is the potential that in years to come, we transition a contracted maintenance of these systems to Burlington Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront, our Parks Department, to manage this, because they have horticulturists on staff, they have landscapers on staff, and they're just so much better suited to this maintenance as opposed to the DPW streets staff that does maintenance on our less green components. Mm-hmm. What I can assure you is maintenance is an incredibly high priority. It's required, and we've gotten the message loud and clear from our residents that they want to see that maintained. So whether it's through a private contractor that we hire out directly, or whether we transition to additional city staff through BPRW to maintain that, one way or another, we're going to keep the level of maintenance that I think we documented we can do this year, and we'll hopefully maintain that line, if not improve in years to come.
Thank you. So I'm going to move over to William Parkle's, I think it's a 3-part question if I'm counting right. So first part of it is pervious asphalt cost competitive with normal asphalt? Is it available to private paving contractors? And are there monetary benefits available to Burlington homeowners who may be thinking of repaving an existing asphalt driveway? And I can give you those again if you want.
The first answer is no, it's not cost competitive right now. Reason being sourcing of the asphalt. And I think this gets to your second question about like, how do you get pervious asphalt? Pervious asphalt is so new that one of the biggest challenges is getting a local asphalt plant to actually make the right batch. And then the installation is so new and so few people have done it, you need to hire a professional to be on site while it's getting poured and placed, so that in that batch, they install it correctly. I think the last part of your question was, incentives or maybe even the ability for local residents to use pervious asphalt. On that small of a scale, it simply does not make sense to use pervious asphalt. Pervious asphalt makes a lot of sense on large scale parking lots. Where places like Burlington can throw their weight around and get a paving company to do porous. They might be doing that. Yes, we're paying them, but also we pay them to do a lot of regular paving throughout the year. So they say, oh, you're a good client, we'll go ahead and do that. If Burlington and other municipalities, and let's say V-Trans, were to get on board and start asking for more and more pervious, well, then you'd create a market. Right now, if you're an individual homeowner and you want to pave a 100-foot driveway, it's simply not cost effective, or even potentially possible. At this stage in the game, you would be doing just as much good. It would still cost some money because pervious pavers are actually a little more expensive per square foot than pervious asphalt if you have these large lots being poured. But if you want to do a pervious driveway, your two best options are completely pervious paver installation. That's pretty straightforward. Almost any contractor can do it. You're digging up, putting a sub-base of gravel, and then putting interlocking concrete pavers in, and then a special sort of angular rock in between those gaps to make sure that infiltration happens for a while. Alternatively, you can do a ribbon strip, which is reestablishing the whole driveway back to like a native infiltration rate. And actually our Vermont Stormwater Management Manual has specs in place on how to make a previously like a compacted soil into mimicking a more native soil profile. And then you can just have either a concrete pad, or I think in the picture we have here, those hollow concrete paver blocks that you actually just have soil in and grow grass. Those are probably your best bets as an individual resident right now. In 10 years, maybe we'll have, a lot of options for porous asphalt, but right now that's just not the case.
Thanks. For the I don't see other questions right now. So one follow up on that is the truck that you were saying you're procuring right now, that's to manage the porous asphalt?
Yeah. So, sorry, I went past it. That white truck, the city actually already owns, and we're getting a new one. That's a Vector. That boom arm you see coming across, that's an 8-inch hose. That's a vacuum suck. On the front of that white vehicle, you'll see a thick diameter, reddish, orangish cord, tubing. That's a jetter. That's a jetter for like blowing out water that they have stored on the truck. So Burlington already owns that piece of infrastructure. Most folks with stormwater utilities do. Lots of towns do. They can be used They are used for cleaning catch basins and jetting lines. So this is something a lot of municipalities have. The red and the blue pieces are the things we're looking on procuring. The red is essentially a zero-turn mower, but instead of a mower, it's a vacuum. So you're gonna use that, say, 4 times a year on your porous lots, just sucking up whatever you can, sucking up whatever you can. The blue component on the front has these dozens and dozens of angled, like high pressure sprayers on them, designed to not just pressure wash the grit down, because you can end up clogging a system like that, but to come in at such an angle so that it blows it out and then sucks it in. So that's called more of a rehabilitation cleaning. And that helps you take a system that's maybe experienced a hard couple months and bring it back to a little bit better infiltration. So it's the blue and the red component there that we're planning on purchasing to work in concert with the larger equipment that we already own.
Nice, thanks. Are there other questions?
I really enjoy chatting about this stuff, folks. So, oh, I actually see one in the Q&A. Where does the vacuumed waste go?
Oh yeah, thank you.
We have something called a grit pile. Again, most municipalities do. What will happen is they'll suck up all of both the liquid and the solid, say from a catch basin or from a pervious lot like this. That'll get stored in the truck, big empty tank. Excuse me. There's a 2-part disposal process. It's decanted, which means the truck has systems in place that allow you to sort of dump the water out without dumping the solids out. That water is decanted into a manhole and then goes and gets treated at the wastewater treatment plant. So if for some reason that water has heavy metals in it or other constituents that we might be able to grab in secondary, like tertiary treatment at a wastewater treatment plant, you'll have that benefit. Once you've decanted as much water as you can, you then, just like a dump truck, you dump it out into your grit pile. Those grit piles stay there for a period of time, often up to a year, and they get stirred from time to time. And what we're most often worried about are volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and those will just off-gas over time. So if a grit pile has been there for a year and we've been turning it, we'll take a grab sample, send it to a lab, and they'll come back and say, your soil's good. And then we'll actually use it as clean fill throughout the city for different projects. Yeah, so that's where the vacuum waste goes.
Nice. Lynette says thanks, and she hopes there'll be a vac truck tours for Water Quality Day.
Yeah, the vac truck, again, pandemic-related delay. We should have had it already, but we're hoping it shows up here this late fall, early winter. The vac trucks are pretty cool. So we're hoping to show that off when we get our newer model. And then, of course, we can partner it with these Pervious cleaning pieces of machinery, which will also work on Pervious pavers, by the way, at later dates, maybe Clean Water Week or something like that.
Nice. Sounds good. Thanks from Kristen to you for super informative and accessible. I have one question that I had jotted down that I'm wondering about, and it sounds like it is. So I'm just wondering, for the outreach, when you have a plan in place to do some kind of a practice or implement a practice, I know at the state level, there's a very formal sort of public hearings and whatnot. And it sounded like there's a formal outreach process that happens with anytime the city is going to propose something as well. Is that true?
Formal at this stage in the game might be a little bit more than what we have. To kind of rephrase that, I would say there are certain approvals we need to get from various, governmental bodies. If we were to be doing a big project on a piece of public property, we might even need to get city council approval. That's a big maybe. For a fact, if we're removing parking, we need to get Public Works Commission approval. The approval is made a little bit easier if we're working within the city's right-of-way. The city's right-of-way is, of course, our right-of-way. We can theoretically do anything we need in it to meet the environmental, traffic, safety-related needs of the city. With that said, we're not a bully. We don't want to be a bully. We want to work with the residents that live adjacent to that right-of-way to make the maximum accommodations practicable. So when you say formal process, it's I think we're always learning and evolving as we go. We have a public information manager who's essential in these outreach efforts. So while maybe not formal, the basic process is, we work internally and maybe with a consultant to get to a 30% design. At that point, when we start to have a better idea what we want, we pull together informational outreach, which historically meant going to NPA meetings. For those non-Burlingtonites, that's national, well, basically neighborhood meetings. We basically go there, give 5-10 minute presentations, prep everyone for what's coming down the pike, and that by the time ground is broken, everyone there knows. In that process, we're getting Public Works, Commission approval, fire department approval, so on and so forth.
Nice.
Someday it'd be nice to have a more codified, standard operating procedure for this sort of thing. But when every project is so unique in its own way, you kind of got to be a little versatile.
That's totally fair. Thank you. And lots of thanks coming in the chat from various folks. So any last minute questions from folks? Thank you so much, James. I really appreciated the timeline and the linking back to what I almost turned on my camera just so you could see that we were laughing with you. That was great, and appreciate all that you shared. I think it made a really good connection between what the drivers are and what you have to deal with in terms of the city and the challenges of different soil types and the different processes that you have to work through within the city, from parking to landowner appreciation for what might be happening in their part of the city and onward. So thank you for taking time to put that together and to share with all of us. And thanks everybody who joined us today from your various locations near and far. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. And if anyone has any other questions, they can reach out to Chris and get my contact info. I think I failed to put it on this presentation. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, we can make sure that we can get that to folks. Jonathan Armstrong says, thanks, looks like lots of good work happening in Burlington. I'd definitely be interested in joining Lynette on the vac truck tour. So you're gonna.
Okay, I guess we have to do it.
Technology, right? It's like so cool. We all want to like drive the vac truck or something. I don't know, or like put stuff down on the earth and then see it in, move away in color or something. I don't know. Anyway, lots of fun to think about. So Ashley and I are gonna stay on with our students for the formal class. And then if anybody does have more questions, you're welcome to continue to ask, or we can have everyone else sign off and we'll hang.
Okay, I will step away. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James.